Just this past May, a group of orcas in the Strait of Gibraltar sank their 7th boat in the last 4 years. Now, some are cheering the orcas on in their destruction of a commodity usually enjoyed by society's upper classes, while others are calling for the orcas' demise for the very same reasons. In this video, I'll go over who these orcas are, what these interactions with vessels actually look like, and how we can protect both mariners and orcas in this area. My name is Fred, and I'm the Orca Man. Welcome to the world of orcas. The Gladis Orcas are the most popular orcas of our time, and it's about time that somebody introduced you to them. The classification Gladis comes from the term gladiator, and it's only given to those whales who have been recorded in instances with vessels. Now, these orcas are part of a larger population, albeit not much larger. I'm talking about less than 50 individuals known as the Iberian orcas. This is a community around the eastern North Atlantic who mainly feed on bluefin tuna. And while these orcas are just now coming into the news, that doesn't mean that killer whales haven't existed around this area for a very long time. In fact, one of the first written instances we have of killer whales is of an orca washing up on the beaches of Italy that was recorded by Pliny the Elder. Now, because there is concern about the size of this population, the Iberian orcas are considered critically endangered on the ICUN Red List. But naturally, these whales, specifically the Gladis orcas, don't let their numbers stop them from making headlines across the world. Initially, there was only 3 whales that were interacting with boats in 2020. In that same year, 6 more joined in indirect roles. In 2021, another 5 joined in. And finally, the most recent member was identified in 2022. That in total makes our 15 Gladis orcas, which are known, like I said before, with Gladis as their marcator. So when we hear about the matriarch of the group, White Gladis, her name is specifically White Gladis, Gladis Blanca. A lot of the other ones are named after colors and others in terms of size. A lot of these orcas in this group are actually juveniles. Now, of course, 15 whales, they couldn't cause that much damage, could they? Let's get into what these instances actually look like and how this might be a little bit sensationalized. Imagine this. You're sailing down the Strait of Gibraltar without a care in the world. And then you hear it. And if you don't hear it, you feel it. A lot of these instances start with the orcas making themselves known, which is usually done in one of 3 ways. Either you hear them coming, you can hear the blows, they're very loud, or you have the helmsman is moving the steering wheel and changing the rudder. For anybody who's not familiar with boat terminology, a rudder is the steering mechanism beneath the boat to help guide the boat in whatever direction it's going. When you're turning the wheel, you're turning the rudder in most instances when we talk about sailboats. Now, when they're doing that, the rudder might be a little bit pressure in one way or another, might have a little bit of pressure one way or another. And the other is just the boat gets bumped itself. Now, 2 clarifications immediately. Orcas are smart. They're smart as hell. But they're not actively trying to steer any boats off course when they play with the rudder of the ship. Like, they're not trying to disengage the steering mechanism as a plot in a further plan to mess with these sailors. But why would the orcas start to try to play with that rudder, the steering mechanism of the boat, as a helmsman might be trying to turn it? Well, think about it this way, right? You have an orca that's under your boat, and there's this little thing that's moving back and forth. And if you push on it a lot one way, and the orca's pushing on it a lot the other, the helmsman at that point is technically playing tug-of-war with a killer whale. Now, in the greater majority of interactions these orcas have with vessels, the vessels don't sink. Not only do they not sink, they walk away with very minimal damage. Take the Jajo racing team in the ocean race, for instance, back in 2023. The orcas came up, they played with the rudder for a little bit, and then they disappeared. The team was naturally shaken up, but they were able to return to the race very quickly after that. Now, of course, there are other instances, the greater majority of which we've heard of, where a boat will go down. Take the Champagne, for instance, in May of last year. 3 orcas took interest in the vessel and started playing with the rudders and messing around with the boat, and so the captain called in the Coast Guard. They was just calling them to make them aware of the situation at that time, and it wasn't until an hour and a half later that the crew realized that the rudder was damaged enough that the boat started to take on water. And it was only at this point that the crew actually called in for any kind of assistance. Now, 20 minutes after that, a rescue cruiser ended up coming on scene. Everybody was able to get off and get onto that vessel, and they started towing the Champagne back into shore. Now, at this point, the orcas are gone, the crew is safe, they have a pump in the boat, and they're towing it back to shore. And they do this for 11 nautical miles. And it was only after that, around the 11-mile mark, they could see shore. They were pretty close, but they realized that the boat had taken on too much water, so they had to let it sink because they couldn't bring it back in. So in this instance, everybody was okay and they had ample time after the orcas were gone to call for safety and get help, and the boat was able to be towed 11 miles before it took on enough water to sink. Now that's only one of the 7, but the other 6 aren't very different. By the time help arrived in a lot of these instances, the killer whales were already gone, and everybody was able to walk away from each of these instances without so much as a bruise. And the boats themselves, while they do sink hours after the interaction happens, and at such a slow rate that the boat's able to be towed in for a while, usually before it goes down. But that's not everything that's happening, because as the memes are getting rampant and the reports are starting to pile up of this instances happening, the people, and the mariners specifically in the Strait of Gibraltar, are not taking very kindly to their underwater neighbors. And some have even decided to take matters into their own hands. I'm talking about the mariners who are throwing seal bombs, actually shooting at the killer whales, putting fuel into the water when they see the orcas are coming near to try and dissuade them from going near the boat. As of this point, there's even somebody that's been detained by the Spanish Civil Guard for shooting at these orcas with a rifle. While this one instance shows that we can be accountable for our actions in some capacity, we're still seeing many videos come out from this area of people getting more aggressive with these whales. Just a quick aside, I just recently found out that there was a man charged, and I mean this in the most serious way possible, with body slamming an orca. This happened in New Zealand. He ended up getting charged 600 New Zealand dollars. And I didn't think I'd have to say this today, but a PSA to all of you at home. Please don't body slam killer whales. Now to get back to the Gladis Orcas, and in any of these instances where boats have actually sunk, I want to remind you guys of a few things, right? 1, everybody's walked away okay. 2, every instance with the vessels, they're not sinking while the orcas are there. The orcas are long gone by the time that these vessels sink, and it is usually after they are able to be tied up and towed in that this happens. And of course the last one is, in all of the instances that we've seen recorded, the scientists in this area do not see this as any form of aggression on the part of the orcas. Like I said, they're playing. As far as they can see it, this is just a thing they're kind of having fun with. So that all being said, how do we keep the Gladis Orcas and the mariners in this area safe? Let's start with how mariners can keep themselves safe in this area. I'm going to imagine that the very few of you that are watching this would be sailing around the Strait of Gibraltar, but it is a good thing to know in general when talking about this topic. The set recommendations for what happens when you show up and there's killer whales around, in there and most places, is to slow down and turn your engine off. This stops the speed of the boat naturally, which is part of the reason why the orcas might want to play with it in terms of jet streams or otherwise. And you don't want to press or hold on to the steering wheel, because if you do that, it gives the orca something and a reason to go at the rudder even more. When they feel somebody pushing back on them, it kind of almost entices them, dare I say. With the vessel more stationary, whether or not it's taking down the sails or slowing down the engine and turning that off, and then nobody at the helm so that the rudder is free to move as it is and the killer whales aren't enticed to go at it. With those things in place, the crew wants to make sure that the VHF radio is on. The VHF radio is the warning radio that you can use to get in contact with the Coast Guard and any other rescue vessels if anything were to happen to the vessel. Now, in all of these instances, the overwhelming majority of the time, the orcas will stick around for a little bit and then they'll leave. They won't have an interest in you and they will quite literally go on their way. That being said, if anything does happen to the vessel, calling the Coast Guard is the best move, and it's been shown in every single instance where a vessel has been damaged that the Coast Guard is not only able to get there in enough time, but the time that they do, everybody will be okay. So for mariners, it's pretty straight and simple. Stick to your lane. If the orcas come around, it is their place. Step off, let them be, and they will be bored enough to leave. Now, of course, that's in the context of keeping the mariners safe. Now, how do we keep the orcas safe? Now, if the mariners, when they see orcas approach, do all of those things, the orcas are in a much better position to not be harmed by an engine, a propeller, be injured as they're interacting with the boat more, because as orcas interact with vessels more, there is a greater chance of them getting injured as well. But I think the other large aspect of this that needs to be talked about is that the orcas themselves are mostly being harmed by the people they're coming up to. Now, the honest truth of protecting the orcas, as far as I understand it, can actually happen from anywhere across the world. Because this is a global news event. Everybody knows that killer whales have sunk boats in the Strait of Gibraltar by now, but not everybody knows that the orcas aren't actively and aggressively trying to get these boats down. And it's partially that narrative that I believe is fueling the fear for a lot of the mariners that are going to this area, besides the frustration of the boats already having some damage done to them and them not being able to do anything about it. I sincerely believe the next greatest thing we can do for these whales is not necessarily to change the narrative, but to add more nuance around it. Because for the Gladis Orcas, how we talk about these instances matters for the population itself's survival. Because if people continue to pollute the water that these orcas are in as they're coming around and try to throw whatever they can at them in terms of ammunition, their future doesn't look good. We've seen orca trends come in and out of popularity with these animals. Take the fish hat instance for the southern or resident killer whales here in the Pacific Northwest, where it happened for a little bit back in the 80s and then it was brought back again in the early 2000s or mid-2000s, like 2010s, and then stopped altogether after that. Talk nice about the whales. I think that's all I'm trying to say. We all know that orcas are sinking boats in the Strait of Gibraltar. Like I said at the beginning of this video, they are the most popular population of orcas that has ever existed. But the way that we frame who they are and how they interact and what these interactions are changes the way that people who actually see them will engage with these animals. And while damage is being done to vessels, that is a problem for us to solve. It is not for us to impart on the orcas to get rid of them so that it stops happening. I'm not asking you to stop joking about the fact that this is an objectively funny thing that's happening throughout the world. As we're having these conversations, I think adding the layer of understanding that these are still wild animals and we are in their space and we can only do as much as we can to stop those interactions is a large part of it. And the fact that they're not aggressive. And I hope in this video I've been able to kind of explain and shed a little bit more light onto, like I said, who these orcas are, what these instances actually look like. And I hope you're able to take that and communicate that to your friends, share this video or otherwise, because I believe in understanding the situation itself, we can help protect the orcas there, and like I said, especially the mariners and anybody that's actually in the water, that much better. Once again, my name is the Orca Man, and I hope you enjoy. This is the first of hopefully many YouTube videos. I'd like to continue educating you on the populations of orcas around the world and different aspects regarding them. So thank you for taking the time to watch this. I still at this point cannot believe there are so many people as interested in orcas as there are, and I'm excited to continue sharing more with you. So if you want to hear more about killer whales, feel free to stick around. My name is the Orca Man, and welcome to the world of orcas.